So thank you everyone for joining us for this by name listing coordinated access community practice call to learn more about the work that's taking place in Dufferin County that has led to a 50% reduction in chronic homelessness. We will begin with a land acknowledgement, and I invite you to take this opportunity to put your own land acknowledgement in the chat. I am located in Kitchener, Ontario, which is situated on the traditional lands of the Anishinaabe, the Haudenosaunee, and the Neutral peoples whose presence on these lands continue to this day. And we do recognize from coast to coast to coast the ancestral territory of all the Inuit, Métis, and First Nations people that call this land home. And I see some of those are going to come into the chat as folks acknowledge the land that they're joining us from. My name is Marie Morrison. I am the Director of Built for Zero Canada within the Canadian Alliance to End Homelessness, and I am your host for today's webinar. And I'm very excited to introduce our presenters, who are Julie Griffin, who's been working with the County of Dufferin since 2000 and in the Housing Department for the past 11 years. She's currently a community services worker on the homelessness prevention team. And we also have Andrea Smith, who's been with the County of Dufferin since 2007. She's been a community service worker on the homelessness prevention team since 2017. And we're going to hear more about the work that they're involved with and probably a little bit more about who they are as we get into their part of the presentation. I do want to just mention that this webinar is being brought to you today from the Canadian Alliance to End Homelessness, which leads a national movement of individuals, organizations, and communities working together to end homelessness in Canada, and includes the 5 key initiatives that you see on the list here on the page. And this by name listing coordinated access support for communities is funded in part by the Government of Canada through the CCI funding stream of Reaching Home. This webinar is part of a monthly series of webinars and community practice calls through the Canadian Alliance that have been taking place since the fall of 2019 to March of this year. And the list of calls for January to March has now been posted on the site. And so you can find all the webinars and community practice calls there, both those coming up and the previous ones on that training and technical assistance website. In terms of housekeeping, the call today is being recorded. We will send out the presentation and the recording a couple of days afterwards to everyone who is registered. Closed captioning is enabled. And actually, I'm realizing I probably just have to go in and click that button now. So as we get into the presentation, you can choose to view that or not in your settings. Everyone is muted, and really encourage you to use the chat and the question function to make comments throughout or ask questions from our presenters. So with no further ado, I'm going to stop sharing my screen and I'm going to turn it over to Julie and Andrea.
Great. So hello, everybody. Happy Friday. Here in Dufferin, we actually got quite a bit of snow, but that's not very unusual for us. So hopefully this weekend is going to be full of some pretending we're Olympians outside sledding down some hills and then doing some ice skating. We'd like to begin our presentation with a land acknowledgement for our area. So we would like to begin by respectfully acknowledging that Dufferin County resides within the traditional territory and ancestral lands of the Teonatati, Atawandran, Haudenosaunee, and Anishinaabe peoples. We also acknowledge that various municipalities within the County of Dufferin reside within the treaty lands named under the Haldimand Deed of 1784, and 2 of the Williams Treaties of 1818. Treaty 18, the Nottawasaga Purchase, and Treaty 19, the Adjutants Treaty. These traditional territories upon which we live and learn are steeped in rich Indigenous history and traditions. It is with this statement that we declare to honor and respect the past and present connection of Indigenous peoples with this land, its waterways, and resources. So with that, we'd love to tell you a little bit about our home community before we get started. We are located, my arrow is not going where I want to go. There we go. We are located approximately an hour northeast of Toronto, northwest of Toronto. We are in the upper tier with a population of approximately 62,000 people. And that's a population that covers 1,456 square kilometers. Oh my goodness. We have 8 lower tiers. They are Mono, Mulmer, Orangeville, Melanchthon, Shelburne, East Scariffraxa, Grand Valley, and Amaranth. Most of our area is actually rural. We do have 3 centers. Those centers are Shelburne, Grand Valley, and the largest one being Orangeville. The population there is about 28,900. So as you can imagine, most of our homeless do congregate within our largest area of Orangeville. However, we do have the homeless that are found within our rural areas. Unfortunately, in most cases, they're often hidden as a result. So with not much more ado, let's move forwards. I am Julie. I am partnered with Andrea. We are a great team. We have tons of enthusiasm. We're excited about doing our presentation today. The one thing that is something we have learned over the last few years is we are not data people originally. We are people who love to help others and have a great desire to help homelessness within our community. With that being said, though, Andrea took the great challenge with a huge learning curve. She could be an Olympian in the, those great big air competitions that we're seeing right now, because that's about the steep that she's been learning. And she is now, I refer to her as an expert. She doesn't like that term, but I think she totally rocks the data part of it. And between the two of us, we are working to end homelessness here in Dufferin County. We don't always plan well. We tend to come up with fabulous ideas. And we truly believe that if you wait for the perfect program, it's never going to happen. So the best idea is to get out there, get things started, and then make the necessary adjustments as they go. So with all of that being said, Andrea is going to jump in now, and she is going to explain to you some of the difficulties and some of the absolute fabulous successes that we've had.
Thank you, Julie. Well, that was quite the introduction. I don't know what to say there. I would like to say that Julie is an amazing partner. We come from usually 2 very different places when we start working on things. Julie is very much client oriented and I am more of a rule person. So we usually come to a great consensus in the middle on how to do things. But it's always wonderful to have that perspective from a different person when you're looking at things on how to do things, when you're trying to think outside of the box. So she's very appreciated. So I just wanted to talk a little bit about where we were before we started looking at coordinated access. So in Dufferin County, we are currently a Reaching Home project, but prior to that, we were receiving funding from the federal government through the Homeless Partnering Strategy, and we had 1 Housing First worker. That worker provided client support and landlord engagement, which, as you can imagine, became a very fine line for her to walk. She was trying to keep the landlords happy and trying to keep the clients housed. And sometimes that involved a lot of shuffling clients around, trying to keep everybody housed and everybody happy. So as there was also only the 1 worker, we were seeing people that were homeless not being able to connect to supports. And then we saw them slipping through the cracks. The county and the local shelters did provide a monthly meeting with the Housing First worker to try to do some informal case conferencing and try to just brainstorm with her on how to help people. So in early 2019, Dufferin County started holding a HIFAS 4 planning meeting with our community agencies who were receiving the CHIPPY funding, and we also included the Housing First worker in that meeting. We leveraged that table to develop our by name list. This led to some concerns being raised by our agencies. They were concerned because they didn't want to share their resources, such as their rental lists and their landlord contacts. Some agencies only wanted to participate in the coordinated access and the HIFAS just to be able to receive their CHIPPY funding. We actually had one organization ask us, what is the minimum that we can do and still get our money? There was a fear that by moving to coordinated access, they wouldn't be able to manage their own shelter programs. They thought that this would create an increased workload for their staff. They thought that the VISPA questions could be invasive, and they were worried that it would be uncomfortable for their staff members to ask those questions. And one of the biggest problems in Dufferin County is that we don't have a men's shelter. So where do we put men? Where do we put other clients when the shelters are full? So as you can see, there was a lot of work that we needed to tackle to get coordinated access up and running. So how are we doing? So currently, Dufferin County has moved forward with HIFAS 4 in our community. Julie, myself, and one other staff member have completed the Acre Consulting HIFIS Masterclass, which really provided us with a good way to plan moving forward. It provided us with a way for us to see how things from one organization interacted with another organization. So we're very appreciative of the training that we received. So in the meantime, Julie and I worked to create processes and videos to provide training to our county staff as well as our local organizations. We trained Ontario Works and housing staff to use HIFIS for the delivery of our homelessness prevention program, which assists with our rent, hydro, gas, and water. We trained representatives from our shelter and our Salvation Army to complete by name list intakes and updates right in HIFIS. And in December 2021, our Choices Youth Shelter began using HIFIS 4 as their shelter system. I'd like to put a big thank you out to Allie because she actually helped us with the training for Choices. So it took a bit of a load off of Julie and I. And we are currently using HIFIS 4 to deliver our emergency motels, our transitional housing, our housing allowance, and our Reaching Home funded projects. So our by name list went live in May of 2019 with only Julie and I completing all of the BNL intakes. Our BNL consists of the VISPA and local community questions that were created with our community partners. Originally, we only used the single VISPA, but we quickly decided to move to a more accurate assessment and started using all of these SPDATs that are offered. So the single, the family, and the youth. And as our community agencies saw the benefit of completing the intakes with their clients and having them go onto our by name list, they asked to become intake providers. We then rolled out the by name list intake training to our shelters and to our Salvation Army staff. One of the drawbacks that we saw with our by name list was the amount of paper going back and forth between the agencies to add clients or to update the by name list. So in January 2020, we moved the by name list intake 100% into HIFIS. So we used the built-in VISPA and we created custom tables for our community questions. These community questions do change. So from time to time, we'll have an organization bring up that they have nowhere to put information. So we add that question into our community questions. For example, recently, we had a client with a service animal and we had no place for us to put that information. So we've now added that as one of our community questions when we do an intake. So with COVID, the switch to electronic has allowed us to just not even skip a beat. When COVID started and people started working remote, because we were already electronic, we were able to complete BNL intakes over the phone with our clients. And we were able to work with our privacy officer to redesign our HIFIS consent forms and our coordinated access forms to allow for verbal consent. So there have been a few glitches with our by name list. Due to the type of server that we use with our HIFIS, we're unable to use the coordinated access module. So we can see it, but we cannot run any reports on it. So currently our IT department is working with the HIFIS help desk to try to resolve this, but until that's done, we are still using our trusty Excel spreadsheet. I just wanted to also mention that we do have a few clients in our community who have explicitly refused consent or pulled their consent for the by name list. And as such, we're not including them in our monthly bill for zero reporting. So although we are getting close to ending homelessness in Dufferin County, we are aware that we have some additional people that need to be served. Julie, can you go back one slide? Great. So we have something that we started called our coordinated access table, or as we like to call it, the CAT. This was born out of the HIFIS implementation table, and we originally met on a monthly basis. As we started to dig into the clients on the BNL, the meeting moved to bi-weekly, and then it's now weekly. Our CAT members are from our homeless services agencies within Dufferin County. So we have Family Transition Place, which is our victim of domestic violence shelter. We have Choices Youth Shelter, the Salvation Army, the Dufferin Area Family Health Team, White Owl Native Ancestry, CMHA Peel Dufferin, SHIP, which is Services and Housing in the Province, the Lighthouse, which is our local soup kitchen, and us as the county. All policies and procedures that we develop are reviewed by White Owl prior to going to our coordinated access table, where they're again reviewed and adjusted accordingly. And we encourage all members of the CAT to bring forward any ideas on how we can better support our coordinated access system and any policy changes that they would like to see. So one of the programs that we had always have going has been an emergency motel program. This program was designed to assist homeless individuals to access a room in Dufferin County if they found themselves homeless. It was short term and it could only be accessed Monday to Friday, 8:30 a.m. to 4:30 p.m. For our clients, this is a problem. As we all know, homelessness does not take business hours. At the start of the pandemic, the community as a whole brought it to our attention that they were concerned about our homeless population and wanted resources to be able to help them. County staff met with local officials and community members in an open forum to discuss homelessness. This led to a new partnership with our shelters, Salvation Army, CMHA Peel Dufferin, the OPP, and we provide 24-hour access now to emergency motels. A client can call any one of those agencies and access a motel stay. The agencies provide the voucher to the motel and they also send it to us at the county. Then either Julie or myself follow up with the client the next day and we provide community referrals and complete BNL intakes if they're eligible for that. One of the other items that came out of the meeting was the need to be able to provide people something to walk away with. So we created these plastic wallet-sized cards to give out to clients. They were created in consultation with the CAT table as well. We have distributed these cards locally to agencies, churches, stores, and community members. And most of the agencies on this card can provide a motel stay, or at least will be able to refer to somebody who can provide the motel stays to those clients. So what is new? So one of the things we did is in early 2020, we put out an RFP for 2 part-time housing support workers using our Reaching Home funding. The Dufferin Area Family Health Team was the successful candidate. And I believe this is the first time that we have had healthcare directly involved in housing in Dufferin County. With the addition of the Reaching Home COVID funding, these positions expanded to full-time positions. And then in addition to that, through the social service relief funding from the province, the Dufferin Area Family Health Team was able to hire a 3rd worker for the 2021-2022 fiscal year. These housing support workers originally were supposed to work with our chronic population, but as we soon discovered, our non-chronic clients can require as much, if not more work than some of those who are chronic. So in early 2021, we realigned the portfolio so that all clients on the buying name list are supported 100% through our Dufferin Area Family Health Team, unless they are in shelter. So if they're in shelter, they receive their supports from the shelter staff directly. There has been some definite bonuses with working with health to provide supports. The Dufferin Area Family Health Team has committed to connecting those who are without a family doctor on our by name list to a physician within their health team. And they've also hold a monthly workshop with our local legal clinic to complete ODSP applications and appeals, which has been a great benefit to our clients to try to navigate that system. One of the barriers with our program is that we've discovered that with the lack of mental health, addiction, and crisis supports within Dufferin County, it has caused the workers to sometimes have to play more of a crisis role instead of a housing role. And we're working to try to find a way to fix that by working with some other community partners. The other thing that we did with our Reaching Home funding was we hired an additional person. The person we now call as a Landlord Liaison originally started as a housing placement worker. The role was to build landlord engagement, provide light touch support for those who were non-chronic on the by name list. Those light touch supports were supposed to include a weekly housing list and some referrals to other community resources. We realized quickly that we had underestimated the amount of support non-chronic clients would need. So the role was then redesigned to be more landlord focused, and they now provide landlord engagement support for landlords, especially around stuff like bed bugs and hoarding. They act as a bridge between the landlord, the county, and the housing support worker. This allows our landlords that work with us to have one single point of contact for any of our clients who are in the coordinated access program. They don't have to worry about who the client's worker is. They know that all they have to do is call the Landlord Liaison. This position is also the main contact for our transitional housing program. So all concerns at the transitional housing units are brought to her attention. She then reaches out to either the worker or the county on next steps. She completes move-in, move-out, and biweekly inspections of our transitional units to ensure there's no damage. And she also works with the landlord, which is a motel. So she works with motel owners to ensure that the room standards are maintained. So we don't ever want to be putting somebody into a substandard room. So she works with the landlords to ensure that that's not happening. So as I mentioned, we have now implemented a transitional housing program. So although COVID has been very difficult for all of us, it has had a few gifts. And thanks to the SURF funding, we were able to create a transitional housing program. I would like to say we jumped into this feet first with rose-colored glasses. We thought this would just be simple, and it wasn't. And so instead, you know, it has been a bit of a learning curve for us. We've had to deal with bed bugs and hoarding and drugs, unwanted guests and parties. But by getting the program up and running quickly, we learned a lot. We also helped a lot of people stay out of the cold and provide them a place to stabilize so that they could start looking for housing. In saying that, we have redesigned the program multiple times. So originally our clients would enter for a 6-month stay, but we found they quickly disengaged with services until they were close to their exit date, at which time it became a huge crisis because they were afraid they were going to be homeless again. So we then shortened the time frame to 3 months to try to create some urgency for the client to start looking for housing. At the end of the 3 months, workers could request a possible extension if the clients were actively engaged in their housing search. Even with this, we're still seeing clients refusing to engage and look for housing. So we are in the process of looking to redesign the program again to make it even more housing focused. We also noted that there was a bit of a discrepancy with some of the clients reporting to their OW or ODSP worker if they were homeless. We did notice that there was clients receiving shelter portion. We were putting them into these rooms. And so for them, they had additional funds that they could spend on whatever they wanted. And it wasn't motivating them to move into a place where they would have to pay rent. So as of January 1st of 2022, all clients in the program were required to pay either their OW or ODSP shelter portion direct to the county. And if they were receiving earnings or EI, there was a separate RGI calculation done for those receiving those kinds of fundings. These funds will hopefully allow us to continue the program in some capacity in the future. One of the other issues that we found is that not all of our motel locations were desirable. So we currently have 8 units in 2 motels in Orangeville, and we have 4 other units in a rural motel in the middle of the country. So for those in the rural units, it made food and transportation a huge issue. So to support these clients, a partnership with the Orangeville Food Bank was developed. And now the workers fill out a request form and food is delivered to these clients. We also worked with the Grey County Transit Route bus service. They run a bus from the municipality north of us down to Orangeville on a daily basis. And they agreed to put a bus stop at the motel so that our clients would then be able to catch the bus back and forth, and it would make it easier for them to go to appointments. We actually had a gentleman who was receiving methadone treatment who took the bus every day to get his methadone. So it was a very successful relationship that we developed there. So we have introduced 2 housing allowances that are allocated only for those clients on the by name list. So in 2020, we began the Chronic Homeless Housing Allowance Program, which we call CHAP. This is 100% funded through municipal funds. So it has no end date for the client. It is available to those on the by name list who are identified as chronic. The unit that they must rent must be in Dufferin County. And we had originally started this, we calculated the housing allowance based on 80% of the average market rent. But as we were seeing clients finding housing, we were realizing that with 80% of average market rent, they were still having to tap into their basic needs portion of their OW and ODSP to be able to afford their housing. This meant that they weren't able to afford their basic needs and their food. So a decision was made to change the calculation to cover 100% of the difference between their OW or ODSP shelter cost or their RGI calculation up to the amount of the average market rent. So since 2020, we've had 16 individuals who have been provided with CHAP funding, and we currently have 11 who are receiving it. Some of those clients lost it because they moved out of area, or they refused to submit their paperwork, or they have been evicted. If a client has lost their housing, one of the things we did to make it easier for them to get rehoused is we hold their funding for 2 months in the hopes that they find new accommodations. And if they do, then we just restart their housing allowance again for them. In 2021, we started the Community Homeless Partnering Initiative Housing Allowance, which we call Chippy Ha, which was rolled out to the by name list. And it's available to clients whether they're chronic or non-chronic. The unit again must be in Dufferin County, and we use the same housing calculation as we do for CHAP. 7 clients are currently participating in this, with an additional 2 being added as of March 1st, which will fill the program. And this one has a funding expiry of March 31st of every year. Like every area, we need more funding to allow us additional housing allowances. So this is no surprise for anybody, but we are constantly asking for more money, and hopefully eventually we will get some more. So we had to come up with an innovative way to try to get some movement within this program so that we were able to move people off of the by name list with housing allowances. So to try to create some movement, we created an internal referral process to prioritize those who are receiving housing allowances for the COB, which is the Canadian Ontario Housing Benefit, and the OPI, which is the Ontario Priorities Housing Initiative housing allowances that we deliver within Dufferin County. So the hope is that, once somebody is stable, receiving one of our other housing allowances, that they'll be referred over to another program that will free up the space for someone else.
Wow, Andrea, you sure made us sound great. So thanks for that. I'm definitely extremely proud of what we've accomplished so far, but I'm absolutely stoked about what we're going to be doing in the future. So some of the things that we're looking at doing in the future is improved case conferencing. We found our case conferencing table kind of got stuck, and sometimes we'd actually only chat about one person. So we were finding that there wasn't a lot of progress at the case conferencing, that it became sometimes a little bit of a wine session, which everybody has its place, but this was not that place. So we were working really hard to make it into an action-based CAT table, and with some help from our coach, who has connected us to areas such as New Jersey. And trust me, not only their accents were good, they had some fabulous ideas that we've actually, we implemented within 2 hours of that meeting with them. So our case conferencing, we're trying to make it far more action-based. We're excited to see that we're going forth with the request to see if we can add homelessness as a priority to our community housing list. That means not only will special priority be there, but hopefully, fingers crossed if it goes through, homelessness will also be a priority to help get some of our homeless individuals housed quicker into our social housing units. The other idea is to continue to have our service providers implement HIFIS for their CHIPPY funding as well as other services, so that we can all connect and collaborate through that great platform. And then fingers crossed, IT gets it all figured out so that we can now manage our BNL through HIFIS number 4. Trust me, every time an email comes through from IT, Andrea gets very excited, and not yet has it followed through, but our hope is it will, and we have great faith in them. So I'm thinking it will for sure. So with all of that being said, we've had tons of ups and downs. We every day come with a smile on our face and rose-colored glasses. We refuse to give them up, and we continue to push forward. And I think that's our greatest strength. And what we would encourage any other community to do is that strictly you can. You know, the old Nike adage, do it, is one that we love. So now we'd love to open up the floor to any questions. If anybody has them for us, we're here.
Amazing. Thank you so much, Andrea and Julia, for sharing all that information. And there are some questions here in the question function, and I'm going to let further ones come through in the Q&A in the chat while I just ask a couple of questions of you folks, because I was just pulling out and having a look at and I'm going to put this in the chat for everybody, your PIT count. This is overall homelessness. You did a PIT count in 2016, 2018, and 2021. And I think those numbers are super interesting. So in October, you had 78 people identified as experiencing homelessness. And in 2018, it was down to 44. And by April of 21, it was down to 23 total overall homelessness. So, you know, you talked about some of the things you've been doing and implementing, like it looks like those are having an impact. So I'm curious about what you think about those numbers and your PIT counts, and also how your PIT count kind of interacted with your by name list in those numbers.
So I guess I can flag that one. So I was involved in all 3 PIT counts. They were all very exciting. The last one I think was the most challenging. We did it during COVID. So we had a lot of staff and a lot of caseworkers out, you know, feet on the ground, looking for people. The one thing that I really noticed was when I went to pull the stats for the PIT count out of HIFIS, is that we only added 2 additional people to our by name list. With all of the staff out looking, all of those things, we only found 2 people that weren't currently on our by name list, which really was, it really allowed us that ability to see that our by name list is working the way it should. We know who's homeless. We're capturing that data. So that was a really good thing for us. I think that our 2018 PIT count, we did not use those results to start our by name list. We made the decision to not reach out to people 6 months later. We decided to go ahead and start fresh. But I just think that the way we've changed all of the case conferencing, all of the workers that we have now that deal with this has been a huge blessing for our community to see people housed. Every week at our meeting, we are cheering on people being housed. We're congratulating workers for the hard work they're doing.
That's great. Thanks, Andrea. Yeah, that's really interesting that your PIT and your by name list were really lining up. So you feel like you're capturing everyone, and you know, it looks like all the great work you're doing is really driving down your overall homelessness numbers. Because I think on your by name list right now, and I'm hoping you've got this on the top of your head, like I think there's only around 24, 25 overall homeless. And I think you're down to about 8 or 9 chronically homeless. Is that right?
Right. So it's interesting. I pulled that number right before our meeting today because I knew that would come up. We currently have 31 who are homeless, with 9 being chronic. But I can confidently say that 5 of them, I believe it is, are being housed as of March 1st. So the number you gave, Marie, you just had a little bit of 2020 vision into the future, and that's where it's going to be as of March 1st.
Amazing. And you folks have a goal to get to functional 0 chronic homelessness. Like that's what you're working on right now. Is that right?
Darn right.
Our goal is to reach it by the end of March. I don't know if obviously we won't have held that for 3 months, but we are still working towards the goal.
Okay. Get to your 3 or less threshold by the end of March. Okay. That's an amazing goal. All right, we've got a series of questions here in the question function that I'm going to ask you folks. A couple of them are related to sort of your intake and your use of the VISPA and how it worked when it was, you know, your internal workers doing it, and how it's working when other community partners were involved. So when it was just with Dufferin County, what was the process? Did you like go out to community hotspots or out to encampments or shelters, or was it typically email, phone that came to the county office? Like, how did you gather your intakes?
Right. So I can take that one, Andrea. We don't have large encampments here in Dufferin County with our size and numbers. We do have the odd person who is out in a tent, but it's not the norm for us to have an encampment. So we didn't need to go out to them. Andrea and I did it in the office. So individuals would come into the office. We would do it with them face to face. If they were more comfortable calling us from an agency that they were currently working with, they could call into us. If they called in from their cell phone, that was fine. So we did both face to face and over the telephone. And really, we did whatever we could do to connect with that person. We were open to going to a Tim Hortons if we needed to connect with them. And I do recall in the beginning, Andrea did actually connect to a few people at another agency in order to complete those by name list intakes.
That's great. Thank you for explaining that process. So then as door agencies joined with doing intakes and completing the VI what was the process to communicate or submit those? So that folks were added to the by name list? Again, was it email, physically, shared OneDrives? Yeah, what was the way to kind of mainstream that process?
So originally they would submit it via paper, which obviously, as you can imagine, can be quite daunting because you don't want to be faxing or emailing clients private documents. So people would complete a by name list intake and then the agency would have to drive the forms to us. It became very, very paper heavy, and doing the VI spedats and doing the intake wasn't the barrier. It was actually the paper. Having people sign paperwork became the barrier. So that's when we decided to move everything right into HIFIS. We created our community questions through, oh, of course it's going to go
a customized form.
Custom tables.
Yeah, on a custom table. Thank you, Marie and Julie. On a custom table right in HIFIS. So then we set up our providers and we provided training for them. So Julie, I believe, did a video where we walked through a step-by-step on how to enter it into HIFIS. And then through the HIFIS portal, they would just message us that the client's intake was there. That is how simple it became. So it became a fact that they would upload their own consents right into HIFIS. They would just send us a message in HIFIS that the stuff was there, and we would go in and pull the data out on our end.
Right. So do you remember in the beginning of the presentation, I said that Andrea was a big air competitor at the Olympics? This is one of those times where she was. We were finding there was a huge obstacle because of the paper. So I whined a little bit, which is usually my far better technique than Andrea's, luckily, and said, how can we do this? We need to make this work. I'm sick of this not working, and you know, things coming to us too late and paper being lost and whatnot. She says, leave it with me, I got this. And I'm sure at about 2 a.m, she had it solved one day when she woke up. And that's when she came up with the idea of putting it into custom tables and the messaging through HIFIS. And now we don't even worry about confidentiality because it's all in HIFIS. The custom tables are there. They're easily updated and manipulated as we need to add questions to it. And it's just made it so easy, especially if a client goes from one agency to another and updates are needed. There's no concerns because everybody is on HIFIS.
Okay, that's amazing. So a question about your shelters, and sorry, Julie, you'll have to remind me if you have any like specific shelters or whether everyone is kind of, you know, you use motels as an alternative to shelter, but they're asking for those that access motels or hotels through as emergency shelter. What does that support look like compared to a designated kind of on-site shelter? How frequent are the check-ins?
So it's a little bit different. We have the women's shelter and we have a youth shelter. And then, as Andrea mentioned earlier, we don't have a men's shelter. So most of our transitional units through the CAEH program are men. They're not always, but the majority are men. They are working directly with a housing support worker, which has been employed by the DAF, the Dufferin Area Family Health Team, which are our project. And they are supported on a weekly basis with face-to-face visits, as well as like the house searches, etc. So they are actually, hopefully, and it is something that we strive for, getting the same service and connections as somebody who's working with the shelter directly. If they are accessing a motel, which Andrea mentioned through the emergency motel program, which is not actually connected to our by name list program, it is through our HPP program here at County of Dufferin, which is our homelessness prevention program. It's a one-night stay. We then connect with them the next day to ask if there has been any concerns with homelessness. We have found periodically the person that the police have put in the motel the night before is not actually homeless. They have been separated because of potentially a domestic, and they have somewhere to go the next day. It was just for a one night. If they are currently experiencing homelessness though, then we connect them to our homeless program through the by name list, do the intake, and connect them within days to a worker. Do you have anything to add to that, Andrea?
No, I think you covered it.
I listen well.
Perfect. So here's a question regarding the rural geography, and what, if any, processes do you have in place to support those who may be camping, or you said you didn't have a lot of encampments, but people who might be staying in vehicles or kind of hidden homelessness, how are you reaching out to those folks?
Do you want to take that? Or okay, go.
So if anybody in the community, so because we work with the OPP for the motel program, a lot of times they will let us know. Our shelters, our food bank, people refer clients to us all the time. Those red cards have been amazing because they're everywhere. They're in stores, all that kind of stuff. If somebody thinks someone's homeless, they give them the card. We are seeing that people just walk right in. People in our community know that the Salvation Army will provide some supports as well. So they'll go there and then get added to our by name list. We don't want people sleeping in their cars. If there is any way that we can assist them, unfortunately, we do have people that refuse service.
Right. So I'd love to backtrack on that. With the red cards that Andrea's mentioned, we put a strong effort into making sure that those there were not just provided to agencies that already sit at the table. So our BIA were connected, our churches were connected, our food bank was connected, our housing providers that have social housing, because they'll have people knock on their door looking for housing. They were connected. And Andrea and I found that once we got those cards out there in our community, we had people calling us, private members or businesses that weren't part of the BIA, saying, I've heard about these red cards and I saw somebody sleeping in the bus shelter the other day. Can I get one of those cards for them? They could come into our office. We'd give them a few of them that they could then provide to people that they saw. Businesses, our optometrist who's on Broadway, he asked for some cards because he periodically would come in the morning and there was a gentleman on his back step. So he now could give that card to somebody. And we have found that not only have they given the card, they've helped them make that phone call. So they've allowed them to use their phone to give us a call. So this is a community thing. We've tried very hard to embrace the community and to empower the community to help us end homelessness.
Great, thanks. And someone's asking, can we see those cards? And I don't know, Julie, if you even just in the backtrack in your presentation to where there's kind of a picture of one so people can see what it looks like. And you're saying it's just like a sort of a pocket-sized wallet laminated card. It
is plastic. It's the size of a business card. So it's not affected by moisture. It doesn't rip. It's, it's very durable. It is actually a plastic card, the size of a business card that somebody can discreetly put in their wallet or can be discreetly given to them so that they're not embarrassed. It can just be set aside. We have recently had a homeless gentleman staying in the under stairs of a unit. We've been unable to actually connect with this individual because they're never there when we've been able to be there. We've left this card there for them, and the card's missing now. So we're hoping that they will connect to us.
That's great. And I see 211s on there. Does 211, like if someone calls 211, are they referring to you or somewhere else where someone can kind of get centrally intaked onto the by name list?
Yes, and not only that, if they're calling 211 in the middle of the night, they're connecting them to one of the agencies that can do the emergency night stay.
Okay, that's great. So we have a question here. Thanks very much for your presentation, very informative. I wonder if you can speak a little bit about how you increase buy-in in the community for coordinated access. In a lot of smaller communities we work with, capacity is a big issue and a barrier to being able to engage in coordinated access. So can you speak to that?
So one of the biggest things was we knew that we couldn't just force people to do extra work. They had to see the worth in it. So that's why Julie and I took the lead on doing all the Bindingless intakes. We didn't even ask our other agencies if they wanted to do it. We figured we would do it. And then if they started seeing that it became worthwhile, they'd be more interested. That was really one of our biggest things, was having them come to the realization of how important it was. So we led by example. We showed them how it worked. We were able to show them stats from the by name list, show them the move in, the move out, our monthly information. And that really, really helped move them forward. And that helped us go from monthly to bi-weekly, then to weekly. Because even though our clients are on the by name list and the majority are being supported by the Dufferin Area Family Health Team, this allowed the shelter workers who don't normally have support to have that table to also talk about their clients.
Mm-hmm. And then a bit of a follow-up question: if partners are not sort of following through on action items between meetings with case conferencing, like how do you sort of hold accountability to the decisions and actions that you are doing at your case conferencing?
This is all
so this is this is kind of new to us, because like I said, we're just in the last few weeks pushing towards the action based, because we saw that we weren't. So we actually have created an Excel spreadsheet, and I'm really sorry, I'm not quite sure where to find it quickly so I can show it, but it's an Excel spreadsheet that I actually do a share screen. So what happens is I'll say, John Smith, this is what was asked to do, this is who was asked to do it, and then what's the outcome this week, what has been accomplished. When somebody sees their name on the screen, they don't really like to have to say they didn't follow through. So we found, though, the first week we did that, a few of them the next week were, oh, I didn't get to it, oh, I'm really sorry. The next week, everybody had said, you know, we did this or we got this far. So it did help with some accountability. That action sheet, once it's created within 24 hours, I ensure that it's been sent out to the entire table so that they have a copy of it to see what they've agreed to accomplish that week. And so it's constantly being updated. I think
it's little actions each week, and you come back weekly and you're checking back in on those little actions.
Exactly. Yep. So some of the actions might be connect to Ontario Works, right? Because there's no income. The shelter, the youth shelter, one of their action was to connect to mom and dad and see if there's an option to return home. So had a meeting happen. So it's very small steps that when they're all added together become a big step.
That's great. Sorry, I interrupted you, Julie. You were going to say something else.
It probably wasn't important, not to worry, because I don't remember now.
Well, we have other questions here. So how do you train, or how do you deliver the training to HIFIS for the frontline sort of direct support workers? Is it typically led from the county or from HIFIS leads at the agency? So how do you keep the ongoing training happening?
So we did have Ali do our training for the shelter. It was very intensive, so we felt that it would be best to outsource that. But Julie and I have we use Zoom, and then we record our videos, and we create internal videos on how to do everything. We create a process for everybody. You know, we meet with the staff, and we go over everything with them. We usually give them a week or two to absorb it, and then we ask them for feedback and any changes they would like. So really, because we're very small, we don't have HIFIS leads at the organizations, because some organizations only have one person using it. So it's really Julie and I that are constantly doing the training.
Yeah. And I don't know, because I can't see, I don't know if Erin's on the call, but I know she's been referred to often as the Zoom superstar, which kind of revved Andrea and I up and thought that it was a great idea. And we've taken that lead and done our own Zoom training so that people have videos. We find the visual video has really helped. Our Ontario Works people use HIFIS when they're giving out homelessness prevention money. So they often will message us and say, I can't remember where that video is. Can you send me the link? Because, and then they go in and they do it all themselves. So the videos have been a great, great asset.
It's great. Yeah, it sounds like very personal kind of, training, follow-ups, videos, written processes.
Yeah. It was one of those gifts of COVID, to be honest. How do we connect personally to our coworkers to help train them in HIFIS without connecting personally to our coworkers?
Yeah, and offering sort of on-site training.
Yeah.
So a question about the use of the VISPA and maybe just saying how long you've been using it for and whether there's been any change more recently and kind of how you position or use that tool.
So we originally started with just the single VISPA for everybody, whether you were a youth or a family. And then we quickly changed that over and started using the built-in ones in HIFIS. I think it allows us a little more, we had to do some comparison to make sure that we were collecting the right questions for our priorities in Dufferin County. But once we figured all of that out, it's been great because I think it has definitely improved the scores for some people, especially for our youth and our families that maybe weren't scoring because it didn't apply to the exact person. Now we're capturing the correct data. We have not, so we've been using the VISPA right from the start, and we have not looked at changing that at all. So I know that the VISPA isn't going to be updated, but currently for us, it works well. It provides us with a starting base. I mean, our clients are immediately within a week are connected to a worker, usually within a couple of days, but maximum is a week. And it gives that worker just some kind of high level information about the client. And then from there, they dig deeper in with the client.
That's great. Go ahead.
We are looking to hopefully move to do some training for the full SPDAT for our housing workers.
Perfect. That was my next question. So you answered it right away. Like, what role does the more fulsome assessment play in that process? So you're really using it to gather a bit of initial information, but essentially you're connecting everyone to some form of service. And then, if you're wanting to go deeper to really understand, you're using the full tool.
Yep.
All right. Do all of your partner agencies have access to the same database, HIFIS, in order to share client information, or do you find a way to get consent from Bindingless clients in order to share their information amongst your partner agencies? So I'm trying to make sure I understand this question. So I guess, does everyone have access to the same database, or are there some partners that you're working with that are outside of HIFIS? And then how are you communicating with them?
So at our coordinated access table, everybody has signed consent to discuss the clients and share the information. On the other end, we have the client sign a consent that information can be shared with everybody at that table. For HIFIS, not everybody's on HIFIS. So we do have Salvation Army, Family Transition Place, Choices Youth Shelter, the Dufferin Area Family Health Team, and the County of Dufferin, which includes Housing and Ontario Works. So if you're familiar with HIFIS, you'll know that every organization would have rights depending on what you need to see. So Julie and I, because we are the HIFIS administrators, have the rights to see everything everywhere. But somebody at Choices would only be able to see the notes for their clients at Choices unless the client has provided consent. And then they would be able to see some things. So even though that client has provided consent, they wouldn't see if Julie and I did a homeless prevention program application for them because they don't have the rights to see that. So we're very strict on our rights templates in Dufferin. If you don't need to see it for your job, you don't see it, right? So it's not a way to go and do a investigation on somebody that, If you don't have the right to see it, you don't see it. So we're very tight on that.
Yeah.
So although other organizations are all on HIFIS, they may not be able to see all of the data.
That's great. And I know your consent form kind of speaks to all the agencies in your system that are involved in that consent process, and that's identified right on your consent form. Some of your materials are available on the, I know on the Built for Zero website, both on the HIFIS page under the consent information and also on the coordinated access page under the community information. You have some of your resources and tools posted there. That's great. Okay, that is sort of wrapping up the questions, and we've got about 4 minutes left. I think I just want to ask you like some final questions in terms of, or to both of you, what would you, what would be your biggest piece of advice to other communities who are working to reduce and end homelessness?
Try anything.
Yeah.
Don't put your ideas in a box and say it's not going to work. Try it. If it doesn't work, oh well. What's that worst that happens? It didn't work. You're in no worse position than you were before. We're very fortunate that we have a leadership team that supports us and listens to our ideas. Sometimes they stomp on them, but that's okay. But at least we've tried. At least we know we feel like we've been listened and we've been heard. And I think that's really important. But just try.
Great. Kind of says it in your slide, fail forward there. And
yeah.
I launched a poll just so people can also just give some feedback on how they heard about the webinar and that sort of thing. Sorry to interrupt.
No worries. And I would just echo pretty much what Andrea said. There's no wrong idea. There's no bad idea. We are trying to end homelessness. It's not been done yet, so no one's doing it perfect yet. So if you have a great idea, go out there and do it. Don't be afraid to reach out to the other Built for Zero teams that are out there. They are absolutely fabulous resources for you. Andrea and I have not done this alone. We have absolutely accessed support from other Built for Zero communities and asked for their input. But when it comes right down to it, we never go for a perfect program. We go for a program that we think is going to work, and let's move forward with it. It's that we know we can do it. I don't know if it's stupidity or whatnot. We know it's going to work, so we're going to go for it. And I think that's the great thing. I think it's all attitude.
Yep. Believe it can happen. Try things. Remain open.
Yeah.
Keep improving. Learn from others.
Exactly.
Nice. Those are great words of advice. And again, thank you very much for your presentation and for answering questions, and to everyone that joined us on the call today. I wish everyone a great Friday. We did record. We'll be sending this out to you probably early next week, so you have a copy of it right into your inbox, and then it'll also be posted onto the Training and Technical Assistance website.
Great.
So thanks again.
Thanks for having us, Marie.
Thank you.
Yep. Bye now.
Bye, everyone.